I'd like to thank the Melanoma Research Foundation for this opportunity to give you an update on the melanoma research funding opportunities for fiscal year 21. I'm Donna Kimbark, the program manager, and today I'm going to go through a little bit about who the congressionally directed medical research programs are, and then I'm going to give you a background about the melanoma research program, and then get into the weeds of what funding opportunities are available this year for you to apply to. So let's go to the next slide. Here we're going to talk a little bit about the congressionally directed medical research programs, who we are, and what we do. We were started by Congress in fiscal year 92, quite a while ago. CDMRP manages focused biomedical research. What we really try to do is focus in on those innovative, impactful biomedical research projects that may fill niches or gaps that other funding organizations are not able to fund. So what we really try to do is be complementary. Our research is conducted all across the world. We're a global funder. And how do we decide what research to fund and what not to fund? It's really by a two-tiered review process that I'll get into in a little bit. Why are we funding research under the Department of Defense? It's really to accelerate research to advance cures and improvements of conditions or injuries and increase those breakthroughs that we might need for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. Overall, CDMRP for fiscal year 21 is funding $1.5 billion in research. You can see on the left-hand side of this slide the number of different research programs that CDMRP currently manages. I will be talking about the melanoma research program. I'm going to go over those funding opportunities, how our funding opportunities for the melanoma research program are tailored to the needs of the melanoma research and patient community. I'll talk a little bit about how to get information about the funding opportunities and then where to find them. So let's go to the next slide. Here we'll be talking a little bit about the hallmarks for the CDMRP. CDMRP is congressional add-ons into targeted research funds to the DoD budget. I want to make a point that this funding is not in the president's budget. That means every year it's a new program. Essentially, we're really looking at what we can do right now, and we have an urgency to change things right now because we don't know if the program will appear next year. Why do we have these added on to the congressional budget? It's because advocacies like MRF or MRA go to the Hill and ask for these to be added to the DoD appropriation budget. We avoid duplication with other funding agencies by targeting those unfunded or unmet gaps. We really do try to be complementary. In the end, what we really try to look at is our true north. Our true north are consumers, and consumers are patients that will use the products of the research in the end. So we really want to answer the needs of the patient community. It's crucial. It's really important for us to pay attention to that. Each program will have its own vision and its own investment strategy. We have this umbrella organization called the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. It has its vision, it has its mission, but each one of the programs are tailored to the needs of that program's research and patient community. We do have some flexibility of our funding, but I want to point out that we do not have continuation funding. We don't have things like an RR1 where you can have continuation of funding. And there's no pay line. Sometimes people come up to me and say, well, what is your pay line? And I say, well, there really isn't any. Our funding recommendations are based on portfolio composition, adherence to award mechanism, relative impact, and of course, technical merit. So let's go to the next slide and we'll get into a little bit more about our vision and mission for the overarching organization, the CDMRP. Our vision really is to transform healthcare through innovative and impactful research. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Our mission is to responsibly manage that collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions to service members, veterans, and the American public. So when we look at the next slide, we'll talk about our program cycle. Our program cycle is very important to kind of establish where we are and what we're going to do with the melanoma research program as I discuss it now. Our congressional appropriation comes in, and what we have is what we call vision setting. During this vision setting, our programmatic panel, which is a panel of subject matter experts that include lab bench scientists, clinicians, active duty oncologists, consumers, to bring us information that are important to our overall landscape of the melanoma research program. So during vision setting, we set our investment strategy, and that investment strategy includes funding opportunities or program announcements. Those program announcements are then released, and then we have pre-application receipt occur. I'll talk to you a little bit about the definition of our different types of pre-applications, and then I'll talk to you about the pre-application process, the application receipt process, and the peer and programmatic review process. The pre-application process, you'll either have to be invited or not invited for a full application submission. Peer review and programmatic review are our two-tiered review process of that full application package. Finally, we'll go through a final decision authority that will approve that. That's the commanding general. And then we'll do award negotiations and management of that award through its life. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about what the melanoma research program is. The melanoma research program started in fiscal year 19 with an appropriation of $10 million. This year we have $30 million, so that's 3 times as much. So we really need you to come in and answer the call that we have here. The congressional language includes the Senate language. That committee understands that melanoma diagnoses are increasing among active duty service members and that melanoma is the 5th most common cancer among veterans in the American public. Recent research suggests that exposure to high levels of solar radiation in young adulthood is associated with higher risk of melanoma mortality. And then I have those 3 dots. And what's really important about those 3 dots is that the most of the active duty service force is in that young adulthood, less than 24 years of age. 80% are less than 24 years of age. So let's really talk about how melanoma might be a long-term risk factor for them. So our vision is to prevent melanoma initiation and progression. We do that by promoting earlier interventions to enhance mission readiness and diminish the melanoma burden on service members, veterans, and the American public. Our vision is very important. I want you to take that to heart. We want to prevent melanoma earlier on so we don't have to try to rescue melanoma at the, patients that have melanoma at the end. I think it's really important to prevent it along that initiation pathway and that progression pathway. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some resources that I'm strongly going to suggest you go and take a look at. We just published our fiscal year 2021 melanoma research program landscape with research and funding information. We have a summary in there. We have the gaps that we find important for this year. And we have sections 1 through 8. Those sections go into melanoma genesis. They go into risk factors, diagnosis and detection, treatments, as well as recurrence and funding and so on. All of this is wrapped up into this research landscape that I think really tells you why those gaps are important to us. It's a great resource. I strongly recommend that you use it when you're looking at your what you're going to apply. And then we have our challenge statement. Now, I'm not going to read through the challenge statement here. It's on our website as well as in every single one of the funding opportunities. I want you to familiarize yourself with that challenge statement. Essentially, that challenge statement says that we want to change the paradigm of what prevention is. We want to hit the melanoma genesis pathway earlier on so that we can stop melanoma in its tracks. It's critical that you answer this. All applications must answer how they're changing the paradigm of prevention, how they are stopping melanoma in its tracks early on. So you must link all of your research to the challenge statement. So if you go to the next slide, there are a couple of funding opportunities that I'm going to talk about. These are just two of them, and there's more on the next slide. The reason why these two are on this slide alone is that a pre-proposal with an invitation to submit is required. The IDEA Awards supports new ideas that represent innovative, high-risk, high-gain approaches to melanoma research. Here you'll have to submit a pre-proposal. The maximum funding here is $500K for 3 years. That's direct costs. The Melanoma Academy Scholar Award is to support early independent, career investigators to perform research and participate in a novel, interactive, collaborative network, the Melanoma Academy. I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth a little bit later on this one. The pre-proposal with an invitation to submit is required. This is a maximum of $500K for direct costs over 4 years. So let's go to the next slide. On this next slide, you'll see all of the different funding opportunities where you do not need an invitation to submit. All you'll need to do is a letter of intent. And I'm going to go through all of these in depth in a moment, but we have the Melanoma Academy Leadership, we have the Mid-Career Accelerator Award, we have the Team Science Award, and the Translational Research Award with collaborative option. This is just a snapshot. You can go back and look at this snapshot to give you an idea of what you should be, which one you should be applying to. That's why I like to put these as a snapshot here. It makes it a little bit easier to find what you need. So let's go to the next slide. Some of the things that when you decide that you're going to apply to the Team Science Award or the IDEA Award, you're going to answer that challenge statement, how your research fits into stopping melanoma in its tracks. And then you're also going to answer one of our focus areas. Our focus areas are grouped in these buckets and those chevrons: risk factors, biology, mechanistic studies, and detection and diagnosis. I'm not going to read through all of them. All of these are within the funding opportunities and also in that landscape document on the website. For instance, we have for detection and diagnosis, develop new decision-making tools for detection and diagnosis of melanoma that includes easily accessible technology beyond the dermoscope for primary care physicians and dermatologists. So if somebody is out there and really is into AI or whatnot, this is a great place for you to apply. We also have mechanistic studies, delineate the molecular pathways, tumor microenvironment, immune response that may influence metastatic spread, recurrence, and or dormancy. So how do you make that part of stopping melanoma in its tracks? You're going to try to influence and stop metastatic spread. You're going to try to stop recurrence or keep those melanoma cancer cells in dormancy. So that's how we prevent, essentially prevent melanoma deaths. That's what we really want to do here. So let's go to the next slide. So how do you find our funding opportunities? Our funding opportunities you can find at 3 different sources. You can go to the CDMRP website. You can go to our submission portal for pre-apps, our ebrap.org. You can go there, or you can go to grants.gov and go under search grants and put in the CFDA number 12.420 and sort for the types of program. So next slide. We go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about how to submit. So you're going to submit the pre-application to EBRAP. You have to go to EBRAP first because this is a two-step process where you're going to do pre-application and full application. You're either going to submit a pre-proposal, and the pre-proposal needs the invitation to submit, or you're going to submit a letter of intent. You don't need an invitation to submit. After that, then you'll submit your full application package to grants.gov. And then finally, you'll verify everything in your full application through EBRAP. EBRAP can be a window into what you submitted into grants.gov during that full application phase. So let's go to the next slide. So what's the difference between a pre-proposal and a letter of intent? I've been talking about that a lot. So let's talk about it a little bit. The submission of a pre-proposal or a letter of intent, both of those will go through EBRAP. Okay, so those are both going to go through EBRAP. But the pre-proposal is a preparation of a two-page narrative. You'll have the pre-proposal might also include some bio sketches and other supportive documentation. That pre-proposal will be reviewed by a programmatic panel. That programmatic panel consists of people that are subject matter experts on melanoma. An invitation to submit a full application is required. These are due by the end of June. This is for the IDEA Award and the Melanoma Academy Scholar Award. For the letter of intent, this is a letter to state your intent to apply. You do not have to go into detail on anything that you're going to be doing. This is not reviewed. It's used for administrative purposes only. No invitation is required to submit a full application. This is for all of the other award mechanisms, including the Melanoma Academy Leadership Award, the Mid-Career Accelerator Award, the Team Science Award, and the Translational Research Award. So let's get into a little bit about what these different award mechanisms really are instead of just that snapshot. So let's go to the next slide. Here is the Melanoma Academy Leadership Award. This is our flagship award mechanism this year. It's a letter of intent. Therefore, no invitation to submit a full application is required. This is an extraordinary opportunity for anyone who wants to be a leader or be shown as a leader in melanoma. Here we have a director and a deputy director working together to oversee a melanoma research academy of early career investigators that are independent. These are within 7 years of their terminal degree. They have designated career guides, and together you're going to facilitate a regular interactive communication among all the members, assess research progress, career progression of the scholars, really fostering the next generation of independent melanoma researchers. This will also fund development, workshops, meetings, as well as a pilot research projects for the scholars and the directors and the career guides all to work on together. We also have a patient advocacy panel that will work with the director and the deputy director and also the scholars in order to do that networking with what's needed in the patient community. If you want to learn more about this, I strongly suggest that you go to the links that are shown here that include the Ovarian Cancer Research Program Academy, the Kidney Cancer Research Program Academy, and the Peer Review Cancer Research Program Virtual Cancer Center. All of these are great resources to how this actually works. It is actually a great way for our melanoma community to establish a strong foundation for the future and get those leaders that we need for the future for melanoma research. This is $1.3 million for all of this infrastructure work and for some pilot research projects. for up to 4 years. As I said, no letter of intent is needed. Scholars will apply through a separate opportunity. That means that 1.3 million is just to set up the academy and to have the academy run and to run those pilot research projects. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide is really going to tell you a little bit about how this works, the Melanoma Leadership Award. The Melanoma Leadership Award will be scored on their peer review criteria. The peer review criteria includes academic leadership, vision, the management, how you put together your patient advocacy panel, the impact and the research strategy and feasibility of that pilot research, okay? Now, I'm telling you the peer review criteria because it's really important for you to pay attention to the peer review criteria. If you don't pay attention to the peer review criteria, then you're not going to know how your work is going to be relatable and evaluated. So knowing how it's going to be scored is important to bring forward into your project narrative. You know, when you were younger and you were at school and the kid would always raise his hand and say, is this going to be on the test? This is where you find out what the test questions are and what you need to add to the test questions, you know, to your project narrative. The second phase of review is the programmatic review stage 1. Here they're going to look at the ratings and review of the peer reviewers, your vision, your relative impact, the relevance to the FY21 challenge statement, the portfolio balance, and the adherence to the award intent. And then what will happen in the next stage for this is the next on the next slide, please. During stage 2, you will be invited as a leadership candidate to give a presentation to the programmatic panel to talk about your capability to lead the academy and how you're going to develop partnerships and collaborations. Remember, this is not only going to help the scholars, but it's going to help you as a leader in melanoma to move forward and to really network out. This will be a utilization of the leadership skills. How will you be able to utilize your leadership skills to encourage partnerships? And then you're going to, how are you going to evaluate proposed milestones and outcomes of scholars during the 4 years of the academy? Then you're going to justify the proposed melanoma pilot projects, as well as show how you've made it a significant part of your melanoma academy, those patient advocates. Let's go to the next slide. Now, you can't have an academy without the scholars, right? Now, the scholars require a pre-proposal. The leaderships do not, but the scholars do require a pre-proposal. This is an invitation to submit that full application. So who is eligible to be a scholar? The scholars are early career researchers or physician scientists within 7 years after the completion of their terminal degree. We do not count time for your fellowship or your residency, or if you take time off from family medical leave. We do count time in postdoctoral fellowships though. So that 7-year time period right at the beginning of your career as an early career independent investigator. The career guide should be an associate professor. This is someone who's not really your mentor, but someone who's going to help you through the wickets of your career, like what you should be doing in order to get that tenure status and so on. You have to be committed to the Melanoma Academy. You have to have a career development plan. It's important not to phone in that career development plan. Sit down and figure out what your milestones are and really write to those milestones. As I said, it will require a 2-page pre-proposal. And this is your chance to get that $500K over 4 years in a smaller pool. Instead of going into the IDEA award pool, go into a smaller pool that will be easier for you to get a funding for this pool. Now, your peer review criteria includes the strength of the scholar, your PI credentials, Your research project, its strategy and feasibility, your career development plan, and how you're going to sustain yourself through the future beyond the academy. The career guide, is this a strong person who has worked with people before to move them forward in their career? As well as, what is the impact of your research? Even if it's a basic research, you should be able to really tell why it's impactful for patients and the research community. There's some unscored criteria there, which will include your resources and environment, your budget, and your application presentation. Finally, the next step is your programmatic review criteria, which includes the peer reviewers' criteria itself, the scores that they have there. We'll look at our portfolio composition. Here, you're going to have to answer your focus area and challenge statement, and look at the relative impact and your career potential of the scholar. Are you going to be a leader in melanoma? So let's look at the next slide. Our next slide is our IDEA Award. Here you're going to have a pre-proposal again. You're going to have to submit that one-page pre-proposal. Researchers with a faculty level appointment are eligible. You'll support innovative and high-risk, high-gain research. This should be really, your seed mechanism here for new ideas that you're bringing to the lab. You're not doing incremental work. It isn't something that's already being done in the lab and it's the next step. That is not what we're looking for in the IDEA Award. Preliminary data is not required and clinical trials are not allowed. The direct costs are $500K over 3 years. Here we're going to be looking at that scientific merit, the research strategy and feasibility, your innovation and impact, and once again, your personnel, project, your budget, and so on. Here, what you're going to be looking at to tell the programmatic reviewers is that you understand the intent of this award mechanism, that it's really about innovation and high impact. The portfolio composition is going to be important, so make a point of how important your work is to that focus area and that challenge statement. And once again, your innovation, you shouldn't just phone it in. And you shouldn't just assume that people know why it's innovative. Show us why it's innovative. So let's go to the next slide. This is a very unique, I would say very unique award mechanism. It's a mid-career accelerator award. Very often when we're looking at funding organizations, they are either focused in on those early career investigators or they're looking at more advanced investigators, not that middle of the road. What we find now is that RO1s are the first RO1 is being given to people in their mid to late 40s. What's happening there in the middle of the road? Therefore, that's what we're looking for in that mid-career accelerator, to accelerate them to get that RO1. So what we're really looking for is assistant or associate professors that are above that 7-year post first faculty appointment. So we're beyond 7 years that we had in that early career investigator. We're supporting independent mid-career investigators to conduct impactful research. You must demonstrate at least one peer-reviewed extramural funding source. That doesn't mean that it has to be an RO1. It could be other types of award mechanisms as well. We're going to look for a continuity development. That means that you're going to sit down and you're really going to think about how you are going to advance your career. Talk to somebody, go to somebody that you really think has this under control and has done a really good job in pushing their career forward, and find out how they did it. Preliminary data is required and the direct costs are $750K over 3 years. Of course, the peer review criteria is going to zero down on that principal investigator, see how you've been working and what you need. You're going to look at that research strategy and feasibility and how impactful it is. The continuity development plan should not be phoned in. I can't emphasize that enough. And also, you should anticipate what your research outcomes are going to be and plan on what you're going to do next. Of course, there's going to be those unscored criteria as well. Our programmatic review criteria hits all of the points I talked about before, but here we include the potential of the PI to be a leader in melanoma. We want to take those mid-career people and we want to accelerate them to be the leaders. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide, we're talking about our Team Science Award. We've had this since the inception of the melanoma research program. No invitation is required this year. It's just a letter of intent. We have assistant professor or above are eligible. Here we're going to have one initiating PI and 1 to 2 partnering PIs. It's the Team Science Award, so we're all going to be in this together, right? So we're really looking for synergistic components and multidisciplinary studies. The emphasis here is on collaboration. We would like it if you could bring in an early career investigator. It's encouraged, but it's not required. And it's also encouraged that you bring in military or a VA investigator as well. That's encouraged, but it's not required. Preliminary data, though, is required. And the direct costs are $700K over 3 years. Once again, we're going to be looking at the research strategy and feasibility, the personnel and collaboration. How are you talking to one another? How are you actually being important to the research project? Every person that's part of this team should have an intellectual stake in the research. They shouldn't just be offering samples. Once again, you're going to have that research outcomes plan. What are you going to do next with this your anticipated outcomes? And here, when we're looking at the programmatic review criteria, we're really going to be looking at the synergistic potential. So keep that in mind when you're writing up your collaboration statements and so on. When we're looking at this criteria, what I'm trying to give you a hint of is what you should be thinking of as you're writing your answers to each one of the attachments of the application package. So going on to the next slide, this is the last of the different award mechanisms. This is the Translational Research Award. This, again, is a letter of intent. So you do not have to submit a pre-proposal at this time. It's assistant professor or above are eligible. We're really supporting hypothesis-driven translational research. It should be associated with an ongoing or a completed clinical trial or a biorepository. Here, clinical trials are not allowed, but you should be associated with one. You're getting samples from that clinical trial. You're doing that correlative work. And it's really important that we're going to look at the source and quality and assessment of those samples. Preliminary data is required. It's $600K over 3 years, but if you add a collaborator, it's going to be $100K extra, so it's $700K. So once again, you're looking at that research strategy and feasibility, but you're also looking at the source and quality assessment. So really pay attention to your source and how you're going to assess the quality of what you're doing. Because really, if you get a poor quality samples, you're going to have poor quality outcomes, right? So we don't want that. With the collaborative option, you really have to justify why this person is a full-time collaborator here, and you deserve that extra $100,000. So here you're going to be looking at programmatic review criteria that's going to talk about your translational potential. So what is that collaborative work or correlative work, I should say? What is that correlative work going to give you from that clinical trial? So let's go to the next slide. So the funding documents are shown here. I'm just giving you some ideas of what the funding opportunity documents look like. On the left-hand side of the slide, this is the program announcement for the IDEA Award. On the very first page will be the submission and review deadline dates that are important for you to look at. It's important for you to pay attention to this because after the application submission deadline for grants.gov, which is September 28th, I can't allow anyone else in. The end of the application verification period, though, is October 5th. At that point, you can take a look, you can have your view of what came in through grants.gov and make sure that everything is right. The general application instructions are also shown here on the right-hand side of the slide. This is your step-by-step guide on how to actually submit. Work with your business official to make sure that you are working with the general application instructions in order to make sure that you're following all of the application instructions to a T. So we go to the next slide. As I said, The submission process is a two-step process. Your pre-application comes in first. You'll wait for that invitation. If you have a pre-proposal, the letter of intent, you're not going to wait for that, and then submit forward. Okay, so let's go to the next step. What happens to your application? After the grants.gov deadline, do not delay. That's all I can tell you. Don't wait until the last minute. During the verification period, you can check your work. And then after you've checked your work and after all that's done, what it does is goes through compliance. We will look and make sure that you came in on time, that your budget is within the budget that's allowable, and that you followed all of the instructions to a T. If you did not submit a project narrative or you missed submitting the budget, we will have to make you non-compliant. If there's some other issues with your application, we may allow it to move forward, or we may have to make it non-compliant. Most of the time, those rejection criteria are shown in the back of the program announcement. Now, after your full application submission, it will go through peer review. There are no standing panels, remember that. It will be assessed, that application will be assessed by a gold standard through the evaluation criteria. There is no comparison during the peer review. During programmatic review, the programmatic panel will take a look at things. I told you a little bit about how they're going to be reviewing things, and they'll be looking at the evaluation criteria. Finally, we'll get a recommendation, a funding list, an alternate funding list, and a not funding list. If you're funded, you're straight out funded, and we'll run into negotiations. If you're on the alternate fund list, you may get funded if someone withdraws or there's an issue with something on the funding list. You may get funded. If you're not funded, then you will be you're always welcome to go ahead and try again next year. So let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of the peer review criteria. It's really important for you to pay attention to the peer review criteria, as I said before. This is what's on the test, essentially. And if you answer everything that's on the test and you answer it well, then you're going to score better. So pay attention to that. Also pay attention to the intent of the mechanism. If I said the intent of the mechanism is translational potential, don't submit something that's more basic. If I said that the intent of the mechanism is something that's innovative and shifts the paradigm, then don't submit something that's the next step in your current lab work. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide here shows you our programmatic panel members right now. Do not add them to your application at all. They should not be mentioned in your application. If they are mentioned in your application, I have to consider your application a conflict of interest, and I have to remove your application. It is no longer compliant. So pay attention to that when you are dealing with it, okay? So, and don't phone in your impact or innovation statements. Don't phone in any of the statements. It's really important for you to pay attention to all of that. So let's go to the next slide. Some strategies for success. Number one, deadlines are important. Coordinate your efforts. Bring your team together early, including your business official. And make sure that your business official takes a look at the general application instructions and follow everything. The other thing that's really important for a strategy for success is grantsmanship. I like to call this the TED Talk. State your ideas up front and then back them up. This is your elevator talk. You have a little bit of time to tell someone in an elevator what your idea is so that you can get that job. This is what you're going to do. When you're doing that elevator talk, stay away from the jargon. It's not a competition to see how many abbreviations are included in one sentence. You don't want a peer reviewer saying, it was so difficult to get through this application because of all of the jargon. You want a peer reviewer to be saying, it was a pleasure to read. Review your application, your documents prior to submission, and use the verification period. And then the intent of the award mechanism, excuse me. The intent of the award mechanism is really your TED Talk again. Because if you don't know and how you fit in, then you're not going to get that job, right? And you're not going to get the funding if you don't know how you fit in. So make your case to how your research aligns with the intent of the mechanism. In impact is really important. I think people think of impact as the last thing they're going to write. It really isn't. The impact is really your cool science is good, but in fact, impactful science is great. Really tell us how it's important to patients and how it's going to change patients' lives. Even the most basic research will change a patient's life. Basic research, very basic research funded by the breast cancer research program ended up leading to Herceptin. So it's really important to connect the dots in the impact statement. And feasibility, clearly define your team's skills. If someone is coming in on your team that's not like has a biostatistician label on them, but they're the biostatistician, make sure that it's understood that this person is your biostatistician and justify why they can be your biostatistician. Outline your justification and how and why you can achieve the anticipated outcomes. That's always important. So let's go to the next slide. Here are some pitfalls to avoid. Number one, do not include anyone on the programmatic panel for this fiscal year at all. Do not include them in your application. Do not exceed page limits. Believe it or not, people exceed page limits and then I have to remove them. Do not miss the submission deadline. I said that before on the previous slide. I'm going to say it again. It's always a problem. People missing the submission deadline and thinking I can allow you in after the submission deadline, just as long as you send it out to the eBRAP help desk and a PDF. It's not going to happen. It has to come in through grants.gov. So the submit the correct project narrative and budget. These components cannot be modified during the verification period. What you submit during your grants before the grants.gov deadline is what is going to be reviewed. So make sure that those are correct. So going to the next slide. I want to thank you for taking the time. I know this was a long discussion, but I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this. And I want to thank the Melanoma Research Foundation for hosting this webinar and for putting out the good word that we have funds available for melanoma research. Thank you very much. And thank you for providing hope for all of those patients affected by melanoma.